World War II was a horrific event whose echoes are still felt around the world today. Even blockbusters explore the idea of going back in time to deal with Hitler. But what if that actually happened? What would the world be like without the main disruptor of peace in the last century? That's what we're going to explore now. Join us in the comments with your thoughts and versions. Let's start with the fact that Hitler's entry into politics was a sheer accident. And it's not just about him being a diligent student in elementary school, singing in the choir, and being an assistant to a priest. Nor is it about him writing poetry, composing librettos for Wagner's operas, and surviving a severe lung disease in his youth. Any one of these factors could have been enough to steer the future tyrant's life in a different direction, or even cut it short. The story isn't about those early life events. It's primarily about the Inn River, into which a 5-year-old Adolf fell in 1884. Miraculously, he was saved by a passing boy who had no idea what it would lead to. Then came World War I, which Hitler survived in its entirety. In 1915, he was wounded by a grenade, and in 1918, he lost his sight temporarily after a gas attack. And that's not all. British soldier Henry Tandy had the chance to kill Hitler on the battlefield, but decided against it at the last moment, seeing that he was wounded. But let's suppose that at one of these stages, Hitler disappeared. For instance, he was trampled by a crowd after a speech in Munich. To understand what would have happened to the world, we first need to look at Germany at the end of the 1920s and the beginning of the 1930s. We would see a nation humiliated by its defeat in World War I, yet harboring immense ambitions. One of the most bitter details was the transfer of lands with ethnic Germans to Czechoslovakia. It's important to understand that all residents of Germany and Austria felt aggrieved, regardless of their views or genders. It wasn't just the Germans who rebelled, but also the Slavs and even the Jews, who were full-fledged citizens. The second factor was the Industrial Revolution. The defeat in World War I set the Germans back, but Hitler didn't play a significant role in the economic miracle. Its foundations were laid as early as the 1920s. By 1927, Germany was producing 22% more than it did in 1913. This was equally aided by American credits, recognition from the USSR, and cooperation with Europe. Hitler only gained real power in 1933, and by that time, Germany was far from weak. But in our scenario, Hitler is not in the picture. Who would take his place? Actually, it doesn't matter much. What is certain is that the Nazis would not have gained as much power. Fascism and Nazism were far from being solely German inventions. Their roots can be traced back to World War I and the embittered masses. It seemed to everyone that they were shedding blood on the battlefields for nothing. In one form or another, Nazism spread throughout Europe. Mussolini, who shared Hitler's views, had been ruling Italy since 1922. In one form or another, nationalist fascists were present everywhere, in England, France, and even in the USSR. However, in the overwhelming majority of countries, they failed to reach the pinnacle of power. Without the charismatic Hitler, the same would likely have happened in Germany. Adolf's personality is contradictory, but one thing is certain: he was an excellent orator. So, in the early 1930s, the Nazis would definitely not have come to power. However, it's not certain that this would have prevented the war. Firstly, as we've already discussed, the Germans felt humiliated. At the same time, the economy was growing. Any ruler or party in power would have aimed to reclaim traditionally German lands. And here we recall one of the most horrific crimes in human history, the Holocaust. There are rumors that Hitler suspected a Jewish doctor of poisoning his mother. One way or another, it was he who orchestrated the most insane genocide in history. None of his rivals or potential successors had such intentions. What does this mean for our alternative branch of history? Science, because in early 1930s Germany, Jews were the driving force behind physics and other important fields. All modern scientists unanimously declare that Germans were the world's leading scientific power at that time. We hope it's no secret to anyone that the key figures behind the creation of the atomic bomb and space rockets in the USSR, and especially in the USA, were German migrant refugees. Edward Teller, the creator of the hydrogen bomb, was a Jew who fled to the USA in 1935. Leo Szilard and Eugene Wigner, other refugees, along with Teller, wrote a letter to Roosevelt about the necessity of nuclear weapons. And we haven't even mentioned Einstein, for whose head they offered 50,000 marks and whose achievements they attributed to Aryan scientists. Meanwhile, Albert was a patriot and loved Germany. Open any list of inventors of atomic bombs and rockets, and you'll find an overwhelming majority of German refugee scientists. Now imagine if none of them had left their homeland and instead worked for the benefit of Germany. The Manhattan Project, which led to the creation of atomic bombs in the USA, could have been realized in Germany 5 to 10 years earlier. Industrial progress continued even despite Hitler's racial purges, and without them, the results would have been many times greater. Even considering the minds that fled, there were concerns that the Nazis would have an atomic bomb by the end of the war. Without Hitler, it might have appeared as early as the 1930s. Could anyone have reasonably objected to Germans who politely requested a revision of the outcomes of World War I and the return of their lands? Let's reiterate, this was the desire of all Germans who felt wronged by fate, not just Hitler. He achieved this in 1938, and it's doubtful that any of his successors would not have attempted to do the same through peaceful means. At this point, it's also important to assess the geopolitical situation in the world. For the British and Americans, Stalin was no better than Hitler. Remove Hitler from the equation, and the main source of grievances would have been the USSR alone. The decision to enter World War II and declare war on Hitler was not very popular in the USA. Remove Adolf and replace him with a ruler who does not conduct racial purges and does not threaten global empires, and the conclusion becomes evident. We are not stating this as an absolute truth. After all, politics is politics, and a strong Germany would also have faced objections from the international community. In this light, the theory proposed by Stephen Fry seems realistic. In his 1996 novel, Making History, he concluded that things could have been worse if instead of the impulsive racist Hitler, someone cold-blooded and rational had been in power. The consequences could have been devastating. We don't particularly subscribe to this theory. It's not certain that a hypothetical successor would have wanted war. However, the problem is that it wasn't just Hitler who desired conflict. Japan, the USSR, Britain, and the USA were also preparing for the meat grinder of war in the late 1930s. Hitler's role as the instigator of the deadliest conflict in history is crucial, but ultimately, it is not individuals who shape history. The global situation gives rise to these figures. Numerous documents and investigations suggest that the USSR intended to attack Germany, and Britain, up until the last moment, was uncertain about who to fight. The only thing we can say for certain is that without the Holocaust and the genocide of their own population, the Germans would have been much stronger going into the conflict. Furthermore, the terms of the Treaty of Versailles after World War I were unsatisfactory, not only to them. Sooner or later, the world's powers would have had to face war. What would such a conflict have looked like? Pure speculation. The only thing we can assert with some degree of certainty is that there likely would have been fewer losses. As we've mentioned, nuclear weapons would have appeared in Germany much earlier, and its potential rivals might have lost the desire to fight much sooner. Everything else is like drawing patterns on water, just as it is oversimplifying to place all the blame solely on Hitler. Look at the world around us now. Have presidents stopped measuring their strength and waging wars in which ordinary workers perish? No. And as long as people do not realize that it is senseless to skewer each other over imagined notions of racial, territorial, and other forms of superiority, the world will not become a better place. Unfortunately, history has not lost its relevance in our time. Arguments persist night and day. It is unknown how many lessons like Hitler humanity needs to change. Until we meet again, friends.